The guy pulled out a dark blue crystal. It was way deeper than the blue color of a teleport crystal. "Check it out," he said with a sneer. "This is a special corridor crystal. My client spent all their money on it. It will take you straight to the prison in Black Iron Palace. You're all going down and the army will deal with you when you get there." Rosalia chewed on her lip for a moment, then spoke up with a confident grin spreading across her face. "What if I say no?" she asked boldly. The guy's smile grew wider. "If you say no, I'll make sure all of you regret it." "I'd love to. Well, let's just say I'd like to get rid of all of you." His eyes gleamed with a mean spark, but then his expression changed. He looked almost hesitant. "Actually, I won't need to do that," he said, pulling out a small dagger from under his cloak. Kurito was the one who had made this move, and it caught everyone off guard. As they took a closer look, they saw that it was covered in a weird light green goo. "This stuff is a powerful paralysis poison," someone said with a sneer. "It's level 5, which means you'll be stuck in one place for a long time. Long enough for me to throw each and every one of you into the corridor. So, what's it gonna be? Are you gonna walk in there on your own? Or do I get to toss you in like a bunch of rag dolls?" The group's bravery had totally disappeared. They were terrified, and didn't know what to do. The group stood there, not saying a word. Kurito put away his dagger and held up a sparkling deep blue crystal. "Corridor open," he shouted. The crystal shattered into a million pieces, and a swirling blue light appeared. "Not again." The tall guy with the axe let out a frustrated sigh and stepped into the light first. The other players, all wearing orange, followed him. Some of them muttered angry curses under their breath, as they disappeared into the blue vortex. Just then the green player slipped away too, leaving only Rosalia behind. But the feisty red-headed thief didn't budge. She crossed her legs and gave Kurito a fierce stare. "Go ahead, do what you want," she dared him. "But if you hurt a green player, you'll be in big trouble." She didn't get to finish her warning because Kurito quickly grabbed her collar again. "Newsflash," he said with a smirk. "I'm a solo player, which means I don't play by anyone's rules, but my own. Being orange for a day or two doesn't scare me," he said with a smirk. Then he grabbed Rosalia and started pulling her towards the gate. She tried to break free, waving her arms and legs like crazy. "Wait, stop, please forgive me," she begged. "Let's team up instead. With your awesome skills, we could conquer any guild." But before she could say another word, everything came to a sudden halt. Kurito pushed Silica into the corridor, and just a few seconds later, it lit up brightly, and then vanished. Suddenly everything was quiet again. The birds started chirping, and the streams began to babble, like nothing had ever happened. But Silica was frozen in place. She was feeling all sorts of emotions. Shock that Kurito was there, relief that the bad guys were gone. It was all too much. She couldn't even open her mouth to talk. Kurito turned around and looked at her for a long time, without saying a word. Then, in a super quiet voice, he said, "I'm sorry, Silica. I have to admit, I used you to get what I wanted. I was thinking about telling you my secret, but I figured it would scare you off." Silica shook her head wildly, trying to process everything. She was feeling totally mixed up inside, like a storm was brewing. "I'll walk you back to town," he said, starting to cross the bridge, but then Silica called out to him. "Wait, I don't think I can make it." He turned around chuckling, and held out his hand to help her. Silica finally cracked a smile when she squeezed back. It was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The walk back to the weather vane, on the 35th floor, was super quiet. Silica had a lot on her mind, but every time she tried to talk, it felt like her throat was blocked by tiny rocks. When they got to Kurito's room on the 2nd floor, the sun was setting outside his window, casting a warm red glow over everything. As the sun set behind him, his dark shape stood out against the bright sky. She took a deep breath and found her voice, shaky as it was. "Are you really going to leave, Kurito?" she asked. There was a long pause before he answered. His silhouette slowly nodded. "Yes. I've been away from the action for 5 days now. It's time for me to get back to beating this game." She mumbled, "Right? Of course." But what she really wanted to say was, "Take me with you." She wished she could be brave, and ask him to let her join him on his quest. The problem was, Kurito was super strong. His level was 78, she wasn't sure if she was ready for that kind of adventure. Imagine being 45 levels ahead of someone you care about. That's a huge gap, 3 levels to be exact. It was like a massive canyon between Kirito and Silica. If he took her to where he was battling monsters, she wouldn't stand a chance. The first creature they met would probably defeat her instantly. This game world had a bigger wall between them than any real-life obstacle. Silica's emotions were on the verge of overflowing, but she bit her lip, trying to keep them from spilling out. She whispered, but couldn't finish her sentence. Tears began to fall down her cheeks. Just then, she felt Kirito's hands gently grab her shoulders. He leaned in close and whispered softly, "Silica, don't worry about your level. It's just a number. The strength we get here isn't real. There are way more important things to find." The next time they met, it would be in the real world, not in this virtual one. "We can be friends again," he said with a smile. Those words made Asuna feel like running into his arms. But she held back. Kirito's calm voice helped ease the ache in her heart. She took a deep breath and told herself to be happy with just this moment. With that thought, she closed her eyes tightly. "Yes," she whispered back. "Yes, we will," she said with a smile that came from deep down. She took a step back and looked up at him, feeling happy for the first time in a while. He smiled back and said, "Okay, let's go get Peanut back." Silica nodded enthusiastically, and opened her main window on the screen. She scrolled through her inventory until she found what she was looking for. Peanut's heart. With a few clicks, it appeared right in front of her. Next, Silica carefully placed a pale blue feather on the table. Then, she pulled out a beautiful crimson flower called the Minima flower. Looking up at Kirito, she explained, "Now, just sprinkle some dew from the flower onto the feather. That will bring Peanut back," she said to herself. Silica stared at the long blue feather in her hand. She wanted to tell Peanut so many things, about her amazing adventure and the man who saved her life. He was like a big brother to her for a day. Silica's eyes began to tear up as she thought about it all. She gently tilted a special flower over the feather, hoping it would bring Peanut back. Later, in a cozy workshop on the 48th floor of Aincrad, a soothing sound filled the air. A big water wheel turned slowly, making a gentle whooshing noise. It was a small home, but the water wheel made it special and pretty pricey. Despite its size, the workshop was perfect for a skilled crafter like Silica. As I entered Lindarth, the main town on the 48th floor, I saw a house that made my heart skip a beat. I thought to myself, this is the perfect place. But then I saw the price, and my jaw dropped to the floor. It was way more expensive than I expected. That's when I knew I had to get serious. I worked super hard, day and night, and even took out some loans to try and make my dream of owning that house a reality. I did something amazing. I collected 3 million coal in just 2 months. If I were doing this in real life, I'd be super buff from all the hard work and my hand would be tough from using a hammer all the time. But it was totally worth it when I finally got to buy this cool watermill and turn it into something new. Lisbeth Armory. I even beat out some other people who wanted to buy it, which made it feel like an extra special win. 3 months ago, on a pretty chilly spring day, something exciting happened. I started my morning with a quick cup of coffee. Lucky for me, they have great coffee in Aincrad. As I sipped my coffee, I listened to the cool sound of the water wheel pounding out a beat. Then, it was time to get ready for work. I put on my blacksmith outfit, which didn't really look like what you'd expect. It was more like a waitress uniform than a strong, sturdy blacksmith getup. I checked myself out in the mirror, and was ready to go. I put on an awesome outfit, a cool brown top with puffy sleeves and a flowy skirt that matched perfectly. To top it off, I wore a white apron with a bright red ribbon tied around my chest. The best part, a friend of mine had picked out the whole look for me. She's super into crafting and always stops by the shop to grab new gear. We're the same age, and she's got a great eye for style. My friend told me that big heavy clothes didn't look right with my young face. At first I thought she should just mind her own business. But then something cool happened. After I started wearing lighter clothes like she suggested, my sales actually doubled. So even though it wasn't what I wanted to hear at first, I decided to listen to her advice and stick with the new look. And that was just the beginning. She had plenty more tips to share. My friend loved playing with my crazy hair. It was a super bright pink color and really short. And guess what? It seemed to be working for me, because people were always doing double takes when they saw me. My name is Lisbeth, and I'm a blacksmith. I was 15 years old when I first started playing this game called SAO. In the real world, people always thought I was younger than I actually was. And it's even more true here, in the game. Everyone thinks I'm way younger than 50. As I gazed into the mirror, I couldn't believe my reflection. My hair was a bright pink color, and my big eyes sparkled with dark blue irises. My small nose and mouth added to the cuteness factor, making me look like a tiny doll in my apron dress. It was totally weird, because in real life I'm all about hitting the books and getting good grades. Fashion isn't really my thing, which made this whole look even more surprising. It was like two different people were staring back at me. You know what's weird? Even though I've gotten comfortable with how I look now, I'm still the same person on the inside. Sometimes I get frustrated and snap at customers, which always surprises them. One day, I checked my gear and left the store, flipping the sign to closed. But then I put on a big smile for the gamers waiting to come in. "Good morning and welcome," I said, trying to sound cheerful. It's funny, because this is all still pretty new to me. Running my own business has always been a dream of mine. But let me tell you, it's way different from what I expected, even in a virtual world like this video game. Let me tell you, running a business is tough. I learned that the hard way when I first started selling stuff on the street and living in a small inn room. But I figured out a secret: if you're not great at making people happy with a big smile, you can make up for it by selling really high quality products. Looking back, I'm glad I spent so much time getting super good at making weapons. My customers loved them, and they kept coming back even after I moved into my own store. Now, when customers come to visit, I say hello, and make sure they feel welcome. Then, I let my trusty employee take care of the sales stuff while I head to the workshop behind the store. That's where the magic happens, and I get to focus on making even more awesome weapons. I had a big job ahead of me, 10 special orders to fill by the end of the day. To get started, I pulled a lever on the wall, which made the bellows connected to the water wheel kick in. Whoosh, air blasted into the furnace, and the grindstone began to spin around really fast. Next, I grabbed a pricey chunk of metal from my stash and tossed it into the fiery furnace. The heat was on literally. Now it was time to get to work and create some amazing custom gear. It was time to get creative. I used tongs to carefully lift the hot metal off the heat source and placed it on the anvil. Then, I knelt down and grabbed my trusty hammer. Next, I chose what I wanted to make from a list of options. With a few swift whacks of the hammer, the metal would transform into the exact item I had selected. It was like magic, but with a lot of hard work and some really cool tools. I gripped the hammer tightly, ready to shape a glowing piece of metal into a powerful weapon. The problem was there was no secret trick to making it perfect. The outcome was always a surprise. But I like to think that if I concentrated hard enough, the blacksmith's magic would happen. I took a deep breath and focused on the hot metal in front of me. Just as I was about to bring the hammer down for the first hit, I heard a loud warning. "Liz," behind me. I let out a startled yell. "Apa." My arm swung wildly, missing the metal completely. The door to the workshop had burst open, throwing off my timing. Now my first swing was a total miss. I swung my hammer, but instead of hitting the metal piece, I whacked the corner of the anvil. Sparks shot out in all directions, and a weird clang filled the room. As I looked up, I saw a girl standing there looking pretty embarrassed. She scratched her head and stuck out her tongue like she was saying, "Oops. Sorry about that," she said. "I'll be more careful next time." But then someone spoke up, sounding a bit sarcastic. How many times have we heard that before? Ugh. At least it happened before I got started. I let out a deep sigh and tossed the metal back into the fiery furnace. Turning around, I put my hands on my hips and looked up at my friend Asuna, who stood just a little taller than me. "Good morning, Asuna," I said with a smile. Asuna was an awesome fencer, and one of my best customers. And an even better friend. As she walked into the workshop, it was like she owned the place. She spun around the tools and machines, her long brown hair flying behind her. With a quick flick of her fingers, she tossed her hair over her shoulder. Every move she made looked like it belonged on the big screen, totally perfect and cool. I'd known her for a while now, but I still couldn't help staring at how gracefully she moved. She plopped down in a chair made of rough, unfinished wood. I took a seat next to the anvil, hung my hammer on the wall and asked, "So, what's on the agenda for today?" "Wow. You're here early," someone said. I need to get this done ASAP, she replied. Then, she did something cool. She pulled out her rapier, scabbard and all, and tossed it my way. I caught it easily with one hand and slid the blade out just enough to take a look. The usual shine was gone from all the use, but the edge still looked super sharp. This isn't so bad, I said, impressed. Isn't it a bit too soon to be polishing that? I asked. Asuna just smiled and said, I want it to look super cool. I raised an eyebrow, curious. Then I took another look at Asuna. She was still wearing her usual knight's uniform, the white outfit with red crosses and a short skirt, but something was different. Her boots looked brand new and shiny, and she had on tiny silver earrings that sparkled in her ears. Suddenly I felt like something was off. What was going on? It's just another normal day. But then I remembered something important. Our guild has a rule that we have to do a certain number of activities together every week. Hey, what about your guild work? I asked. You said you were stuck on the 63rd floor, right? Asuna looked down and smiled a little. Actually, I got the day off. She said quietly, I'm meeting someone later. My curiosity was sparked. Ooh, who is it? I pulled my chair closer to hers, making it scrape against the floor. Spill the beans. Who's the mystery person you're meeting? I asked, curiosity getting the best of me. My friend got all flustered and turned bright pink. I'm not telling. She stuttered. I raised an eyebrow and crossed my arms. That explains why you've been walking around with a huge smile on your face lately. You must have a crush on someone. Her face turned an even deeper shade of red as she quickly spoke up. And no way, that's not it. She looked away, coughing nervously, and sneaked a peek at me. Am I really acting that weird? She asked, looking worried. I just nodded and said, totally. You're definitely not your usual self. I have to say, when we first met, all you talked about was labyrinths and conquests. It was like, wow, you're really into this stuff. But since spring you've seemed different. I'm surprised you'd even think about skipping your usual weekday gaming sessions. What's going on? Is someone influencing you to change your ways? So, who is it? Is that someone you know? I asked.
Maybe. I'm not sure, Asuna replied.
Well, bring him along next time. I joked, but then, Asuna said something that totally caught me off guard. I swear, it's not like that. It's all one-sided. She insisted.
I was shocked.
Really? I exclaimed. Asuna is an amazing player and the second in command of the Knights of the Blood, the strongest guild in the game. She's also incredibly beautiful. There are tons of guys who have a crush on her. It's like every star in the sky has a crush on her. But I never thought that she might have feelings for someone too. I don't know, Asuna said, looking unsure. Wow, he's really weird, she said, staring off into space with a small smile on her face. You could almost imagine hearts and flowers floating around her head. It was that kind of moment. It's tough to figure him out, she continued. He does his own thing, like he's listening to a different song than everyone else. But the crazy thing is he's super powerful. Her friend raised an eyebrow, curious. Really? Really? More than me? Definitely. I'd lose in a heartbeat if we had a one-on-one fight. This new info helped narrow down the list of possible names. I started thinking about all the famous fighters I knew. But Asuna quickly waved her hands and said, no need to guess. I just smiled and said, okay. I'll just have to wait until you introduce me to this super strong person then. Hey. If he needs any help with weapons, be sure to give me a shout out, I said with a grin. My friend chuckled and replied, you're always thinking about your business. Liz, I'll definitely let him know about your awesome work. Just then he suddenly exclaimed, wait, can you sharpen that for me right now? I nodded and stood up, holding Asuna's sleek rapier. The thin blade was safely tucked away in its bright red scabbard. I walked over to the grindstone in the corner of the room, ready to get to work. Just a sec, I said, preparing to sharpen the blade to perfection. Check out my awesome new sword, Lambent Light. It's a super cool rapier that's one of the best I've ever used in Setsuo. Making it was a challenge, even with the best materials and tools. You see, when you craft something, there's always an element of surprise. You never know exactly how it will turn out. I might get lucky and make another sword this amazing once every few months. I carefully picked up Lambent Light with both hands and placed it on a spinning grindstone to give it a tune-up. Sharpening a weapon isn't exactly rocket science, you just hold it against the stone until it's done. But this sword was special, so I wanted to treat it with care. I slowly slid the blade across the stone, starting at the handle and moving all the way to the tip. As I did, it made a cool zing sound and shot out tiny orange sparks. The silver metal began to shine like new again, and it looked amazing. I finally finished working on the rapier, and it looked amazing. The silver blades sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. I put it back in its holder and tossed it to Asuna. Then she flipped me a shiny coin as payment. I caught it easily between my fingers. "Thanks, come back soon," I said with a grin. Asuna smiled and replied, "Next time, can you also fix up my armor?" Asuna jumped up and strapped her rapier to her belt. "I've got to run," she said. But before she left, she turned to someone and said, "Now I'm really curious about what's going on. Maybe I'll come along for the ride." The person's eyes widened in surprise. "No way, no way." Asuna laughed. "Just kidding, but you have to promise me one thing. You'll bring him by here soon, right?" The person nodded, still looking a bit shaken. "Yes, sometime," they said. Asuna grinned and waved goodbye, then took off out of the workshop like she was in a hurry. I let out a deep breath and slumped back in my chair. "Lucky," I muttered to myself. It was weird, I'm not usually the type to feel sorry for myself. For a year and a half, I'd been pouring my heart into building my blacksmithing business from scratch, and it had paid off. I'd gotten really good at it, and even opened my own shop. But now that I'd achieved all my goals, I was feeling a little lost. Sometimes I got lonely, which was pretty common in the world of Aincrad. It's not like there are many girls around, so I've had guys asking me out and stuff. But honestly, I just wasn't interested. I wished I had someone special in my life. Someone I really cared about. That's why I felt a little jealous of Asuna. She seemed so happy. Wouldn't it be awesome if something amazing happened, and I met someone special too? I said to myself, then chuckled and shook my head. Time to focus. I got up carefully, took the glowing red end, got out of the furnace, and put it back on the anvil to work on it some more. I love my hammer. It's my trusty sidekick when I'm working in my shop. The sound of it banging away is like music to my ears. It usually helps me clear my head and focus. But today it just wasn't working its magic. My mind was still foggy. The next day I was feeling pretty tired. I had stayed up way too late, trying to finish all my projects from the day before. So I decided to take a quick nap in my favorite rocking chair on the porch of my store. As I drifted off to sleep, I started having a weird dream. It took me back to my elementary school days. I was a pretty good student, but there was one class that always got me. The first one after lunch. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't seem to stay awake. My teacher would often have to snap me out of my sleepy haze. Luckily, he was one of my favorite teachers. He was young and had just graduated from college, so he was still pretty cool. Even though it was embarrassing to get caught sleeping, I had to admit that I kind of enjoyed the way he'd wake me up with a smile. I felt a hand on my shoulder, and a calm voice whispered, "Hey." I jumped up fast, like a jack-in-the-box, and yelled, "Yes, I'm sorry." But as I looked up, I saw a guy staring at me with a shocked face. He was a player in the game, not my teacher. I looked around, confused. This wasn't my classroom with all its familiar desks. Where was I?